Hi, this is part two of looking at the gospel and the stars again, which is a book written by Joseph Seiss, who was a pastor in the 1800s. And again, I want to just say that uh, the scriptures are absolute truth, and this is a hypothesis of how people would have understood and the gospel was communicated to them in the ancient past. And we kind of left off last time, part one, with Luke chapter 2, where it says, Wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star. So they would gaze at the stars, and there were constellations, and they would look for the stars as signs in the heavens to point to things into the future. And to realize, too, that as happens so often, God puts something great out there like stars and signs in the heavens that he wants to communicate, and the devil comes in and messes it up, and that's where we get astrology and so on. But we're looking at the biblical kind of looking at the stars here. It could be that the reason the wise men knew this stuff is because they were aware of Daniel's writings, which were when he lived in their area, their nation. But anyway, in Genesis chapter 1, it talks about what we call astronomy. Remember, astrology is looking at the skies and looking at constellations to determine who we are and what our future is. That's wrong. But astronomy is just looking at God's creation. And it says in Genesis chapter 1, when God was creating the universe, he said, Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And they shall serve as signs. And it says, Leotot, which means simply signs. They point to something. And for seasons, ulmo adim, and for days and years to give light on the earth. So, like a calendar, they could know what day it was, they could know what month it was, and when God's appointed times were coming. God made the two great lights, the moon and the sun. They're great to us. That's what we see the biggest. And the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. And God saw that it was good. So all of this is good, God's creation, that he made to send, if you will, messages to us, at the very least, of what part of the year you're in. So to navigate the calendar year, you can see on the right there's names for the months in the spring, and there would especially be the spring feast of Passover and so on. And then in the fall, there would be the fall feast of tabernacles and so on. And the way you would know when these dates that God said, I want you to meet together and remember these things and celebrate a feast, is by watching the months. And the months were determined by moons. It's what we call a lunar calendar from month to month. And at this bottom left, you can see the different phases of the moon. It goes from when it's a full moon all the way to it just kind of disappears to it's a new moon. And that's how God instructed and how he made the universe for people to know, to be able to tell the calendar and the time and so on. And days also, so from sundown to sun up and so on. That's how we mark days. And God said, I want you to at creation, he said, I have made the seventh day, the Sabbath day. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat is the name for Sabbath in Hebrew. Shalom means God's blessings and wholeness be upon you, his peace. So Shabbat Shalom is what Jewish people say on the seventh day. And a little verse there, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So 1 Peter 2:9. And those are echoes of the Old Testament and what God called his chosen people back then. So, back to our main passage, which is Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. The heavens tell of the glory of God, and their expanse declares the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and speech there could be more poetic for saying something, or really sending a direct message. And night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line, and you'll see that later on, that kind of language, their line. So remember that, has gone out into all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. That's Psalm 19. And in Romans chapter 1, and throughout Romans, it's really a book on the gospel. But he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. In other words, all people. The gospel is the good news of Jesus Christ, of God's love. And it's the power of God through that message that brings us to faith in him and makes us alive in Christ. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So Romans chapter 1 says, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. And often we call this, theologians will, natural revelation. In other words, you just look around and you see the trees seem dead at the end of winter, and all of a sudden the grass turns green and flowers come on trees and the flowers come up from the ground. And you look around at the sunsets and the beauty of God's creation, and you just know that there had to be a maker. So it's plain to them. God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So Paul says they are without excuse. So it's not like you say, well, I've never heard the good news about God, or I've never had any revelation, knowledge about him. He says, no, you have. And none of us have an excuse that way. So they are without excuse, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. And very often that happens when we do not honor God or give thanks to him and worship him. And that's what's involved in worship. Our thinking becomes stupid, and our hearts become darkened. And then a lot of people, they can go on and they get all kinds of degrees, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD, and more, and they claim to be wise, but they are actually fools because they've thrown away the most important thing in their lives, which is the knowledge of God. Now, Romans 10 takes it a step farther, and this is where it's interesting, and this is maybe more the natural revelation here. So Romans 10 says, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, and Paul's argument throughout the whole book of Romans, all have sinned. Jews have sinned, Greeks have sinned, and all need a savior from sin. And Jesus is the one sent from heaven to be our Savior from sin. So there's no distinction. It doesn't matter. Are you a Jew? Are you a Greek? Whatever your ethnic background or whatever. The same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. And to call on him, turn to him and say, God, answer my prayers. If you're really out there, show me. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And that's a quote from Joel chapter 2. But it still applies, and it always applies. Everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord, the name of Jesus, and the name of the God of Israel is included in the name of Jesus. It's Yeshua, and the first three consonants begin Jesus' name, and then it says, this one who is Yahweh or Jehovah of the Old Testament, the God of Israel, the one who said, I was never created, I am, and I continue to be, and I will be forever, and I never will end. That one is the one whose name we call upon, and we will be saved. It's not magic. It's just calling out to God, knowing that this is the God of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So Paul goes on to say, but how are they to call on him whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him whom they have never heard? And our first thought is we as the church need to be sending out missionaries all over the world, and we need to be missionaries taking this gospel out to everyone so people can hear and be saved. So Paul continues in Romans 10, and how are they to hear without someone preaching? In other words, proclaiming this gospel. And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. It means our going forth is beautiful to God and beautiful to people who hear the wonderful news of the gospel. And Paul goes on to say, but they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? That's from Isaiah chapter 53. And the other one about the beautiful feet is from Isaiah 52. Paul continues, so faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. But I ask, have they not heard? Now that's a really important question. Has the world already heard the gospel or not? And my first guess is no, they haven't. We've got to continue taking the gospel out. And that still applies to us because that's our mission. But look at Paul's answer. That's why I put it up there in big yellow highlight. Have they not heard? Paul says, indeed, they have. Somehow he's saying the whole world's had exposure to the gospel somehow. And what scripture does he use to prove this? He quotes from Psalm 19. For their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. That's how Paul answers from Psalm 19 on how people have heard the gospel. Now, the gospel is this message that's contained so well in so many of these verses. John 3:16. Jesus said, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. The gospel is found in John 5:24. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word, this message of good news, and believes him who sent me, has eternal life. If you believe, God gives you eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life already. Ephesians 2:8-9 contains the gospel. For by grace you have been saved. And grace means not what you deserve, but just by the generous favor and love of God, giving you something you have not earned or deserved. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not of your own doing. So what's not of our own doing? Well, salvation is not of our own doing. It's been done by Jesus. Faith is not of our own doing, because Paul clearly says in 1 Corinthians that in our natural state, the natural man thinks the things of God are foolishness. So it's got to be the work of God's Holy Spirit in your heart when it changed from being just foolishness and irrelevant to you to being important and believing. So he says, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works. In other words, you trying to work your way back to God by being really good and doing all these things. No, if you could do that, then you could brag about it and boast about it. See, I'm so much better than other people that I did so many good things that God has to take me back because I'm such a wonderful person. But here in Ephesians 2, it says just the opposite. It's not a result of you doing that. It's not a result of works, so that no one can boast. Only Jesus has the credit for bringing us to God. So that's the gospel. Now, just to let you know, in Job, there's this word mazarot, which is found in Job, and you can see on the bottom right, it has three passages. I'll just read them. Job 38:1 says, "Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades?" And that's a constellation. "Or loose the belt of Orion?" Job 38:32 goes on to say, "Can you bring out the Mazarot in its season?" And different translations will translate in different ways. "Or can you guide the Great Bear?" That's another constellation of stars with its cubs. Job 38:33, "Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth?" To the right there, and I know it's probably hard for you to see anyway, but there are different constellations that people of ancient times would put together in the stars as they went over their head. And to the left, the big picture there is actually a floor or a wall. I don't really know for sure, carpet. But there were actual mosaics into the synagogues, and that's the Jewish people, their places for worship at the time of Jesus, that had zodiacs in them. They still do. So it's not that they were bad and they were believing in astrology. On the contrary, those Jews would be working against believing in astrology because God's warned us all in the Word not to do that. But remember, zodiac is an innocent thing. It's people, and it seems like it's gone way back in history, where they take a few stars and they put a meaning all the way around it. So Jewish synagogues, like a lot of churches now will have stained glass windows, would have zodiacs. So this goes over, and this is where you might want to pause this, because you can go online and you can use your search engine to look up the Gospel in the Stars. The author's name is Joseph Seiss. You can put in your search engine the Gospel in the Stars, Joseph Seiss, and then just put PDF, which is a kind of file. And for free, you can download on your computer his entire book. Now, this Joseph Seiss, I'm going to read from this a little bit. Seiss was born in Graceham, Frederick County, Maryland, to an agricultural family. His interest in religious studies reported began in childhood, and he was licensed to preach in 1842 and ordained to a Lutheran ministry in 1844. So he was a Lutheran pastor. His contemporaries described him as an eloquent pulpit orator, in other words, a great preacher, and said his style is clear, ornate, attractive, and forcible. Seiss was first published when he was 22 years old, and his works were often reviewed in literary and theological journals. A 1904 New York Times, and that's when New York Times was a newspaper. It's a former newspaper now, but back then it was a very highly respected newspaper. There was an abstract which describes Seiss as one of the foremost men of the church, as one of the founders of the General Council in 1867. So I encourage you to look that up, download that book. I'm going to take many quotes from it, but it would take forever if I tried to read you the whole book. Although that could be a project someday for one of us. So, The Gospel in the Stars is the name of his book, and here's one of the quotes. And sometimes I skip around, but he writes, "A sign is something arbitrarily selected and pointed to represent some other thing. The notes on a clef of musical writing are signs, signs of the pitch and value of certain tones of voice or instrument. There is no relation whatever between these signs and the things they signify, except that men have agreed to employ them for these purposes." That sounds like a lot, but let's look at a piece of music. And that might look really complicated, but you can see right away that there are notes that go up, and that's just indicating that each note gets higher and higher and higher and higher. And there are notes that go down, and that's just they keep going lower and lower and lower and lower. And there are two clefs. What that means is these notes just keep going, and in the middle is what they call middle C. You don't have to remember that, but the top one here is usually what you see when you get a hymnal or whatever. And it's almost always used for the range of voice that women, ladies, girls sing in. So it's higher. It's this part. The second, this is called a staff right here, all the lines. Then in the middle, it joins back here. And the bass clef down here is for the men with the lower voices, and that just keeps going lower. And of course, there's different instruments, like a bass guitar will be playing here more. A flute or a violin would be playing up here, and so on. A piano can play all of these different notes, and especially like a pipe organ. So let me go back just for a second. So say you want to be in a choir, but you don't know how to read music. Well, one thing for sure is you know that this is more like the girls' higher part, and this down here is more like the men's lower part. And when the note goes up higher, it's higher, and when it goes lower, it's lower. And it's not like on my guitar I can just play one of these notes and the note comes out. When I sing, I have to guess which note it would be. There are some people with perfect pitch, but for most of us, we're just saying it, that's either higher or lower. Then you can also know if you have, this is called a whole note, just a big O, a circle, and that's a long note. It goes 4 beats if, well, not always, but it's longer than the rest of them. Then here you have like a whole note with a flag, and that makes it a little bit shorter. That's half, this is 2 beats in 4/4 time. Then you get the line filled in, and you start getting these, and that's 1 beat per measure. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is every beat 1, 2, 3, 4. Then this one with the flag on it is half of this. They're joined together like this. Then the one with 2 flags on it is really fast. It's a quarter of 1. Yeah, it can be shown like that. But these are all signs. They show you, they're pointing to another thing, which is the music itself. And it's just agreed upon that these are the signals or the signs. And the same thing with an alphabet. When you have an alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, it's not the words, but you can know how to pronounce something by your alphabet and how to spell it. Well, back to the Gospel and the Stars. Here's a quote. "Thus, when God said of the celestial and luminaries," that means the bright lights above us in the heavens, "and let them be for signs," he meant that they should be used to signify something beyond and additional to what they evidence and express in their nature and natural offices. So he's trying to say that God used the stars, the sun, and the moon to be able to give us signals. In other words, one day, you count 7 days, you've got a week. You look at the moon, and when it disappears, it's a new moon. And then it gets all the way, you're halfway through the month, it's a full moon. And then you get to the end, when it disappears, you're starting a new month again. So This is what he says. And I just want to say that this is interesting stuff, but it's not proven by the Bible. But at the very least, if it has no truth to it, we're still going to hear the story of the gospel in a beautiful way from these constellations, whether they really knew that before or not. So anyway, Seiss says the gospel is chiefly made up of the story of the serpent, and you've heard about that in the Garden of Eden, and the cross. And as a Christian, you know Jesus died on the cross for us. The doctrine of the fall and depravity of man through the subtlety of the dragon, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. And he'll use the King James Version there, because at his time, people spoke more like that too. And that's a quote right from the book of Revelation. And the recovery of fallen man through a still mightier one, that's Jesus, who comes from heaven, assumes human nature, and by suffering death and exaltation to the right hand of the supreme dominion, and that means God, vanquishes the dragon and becomes the author of eternal salvation. So Seiss continues. He says, men who lived almost 1,000 years, men with powers of vision, and that's how long people did live at the time, almost, Methuselah, Adam, and so on. They lived almost 1,000 years old at the beginning of God's new planet Earth. Men with powers of vision that lasted undimmed through nearly a decade of centuries. Can you imagine how much you could learn if you were still healthy and you lived not just 100 years, but 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 years? And what you would see in that time going by, what you could develop is just unbelievable. So Seiss says, men with minds in much closer communion than ours with the infinite and eternal intelligence have employed themselves, helped as they were by the great Maker's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, in observing, classifying, grouping, and designating these starry worlds, assigning them their names, marking their courses, and making them bearers of wisdom, the dearest and most precious ever made known to man. And one thing is for sure is that throughout history that we can see is people would look up in the stars and had very similar constellations or group of stars, which would lead them to a whole story. Again, Seiss says, every atlas of the heavens is filled with figures and outlines of men, women, animals, monsters, and other objects, each including a certain set of stars. These stars, as thus designated and embraced, constitute so many separate clusters or groups called the constellations. So each one is a constellation. And these asterisms or constellations cover all the principal stars visible to the naked eye. Now this gets kind of deep, and he does, and that's why I'm not going to read the whole book, but it's interesting. So I'll read through this. I might get a little faster at a certain point. The primary and chief series of the old 48 constellations, and that's what there used to be, partly because with the naked eye you can only see so many stars and planets, is formed on the line. Sorry, remember I asked you to remember the line in Psalm 19. That concept, the line which the sun seems to mark in the progress of the year, called the ecliptic. So in other words, as a year you can watch all the stars. We know that the sun is actually going around the sun. The earth is going around the sun, and that's why but to our eye, this is what it looks like all the time. There's a line called the ecliptic. And that line is really the path of the earth around the sun, in the course of which the sun seems to move 30 degrees every month, and at the end of the 12th month appears again where it started at the beginning of the first month, and the moon and the planets follow much the same path and are always seen with 8 or 9 degrees of the line of the sun's course. Thus we have a nature-indicated belt, about 16 degrees wide, extending around the entire circuit of the heavens, half of the year north and half of the year south of the equator of the earth extended into the sky. He goes on to say, the moon makes 12 complete revolutions around the earth. And remember the 12 months, 12 apostles, 12 is a big word. The 12 tribes of Israel and so on. But anyway, the moon makes 12 complete revolutions around the earth, suggesting the division of this belt into 12 parts or sections, or of 30 degrees each, for 12 times 30 degrees complete the circle. We thus know 12 equals steps or stages in the sun's path as it makes its annual circuit through the heavens, and this belt or zone with these 12 moons or months for its steps or stages is called the zodiac. And thank you for hanging in with me as I read that. But it's trying to give us an idea of what the zodiac is. And one of the very first signs in the heavens, you could say, is the constellation Virgo. What's interesting is Virgo is a virgin. If it had nothing to do with the gospel at all, still, the world around us had this constellation. And it's the figure of a young woman lying prostrate with an ear of wheat in one hand and a branch in the other. So get that picture in your mind. This is the virgin. Look for a young woman who's laying down, and she has an ear of wheat in one hand and a branch in another. You got that? Here you go. That's Virgo. If my life depended on seeing a young woman lying down with something in her hands, well, I think I'd have to die because I can't see it. But what we could do, and what people did do, is they would see this pattern of stars up in the sky at night, and they would memorize it. They say, see that form? You can draw it on a piece of paper. And they would say that represents, that's a sign signaling the story about this virgin. Now, this is how they say, you can see that those stars are in this picture, but I could have never drawn. And she's not even laying down there, I don't think. Well, it doesn't matter, because they're not exact pictures of people. They're something that somewhere, somehow, cultures around the world came to regard as a constellation called the Virgin. And in Job is where we get some very interesting verses about the constellations and everything. We already read a couple of them in Job 38. But again, hang in there while I read this from the book. And sometimes I skip over stuff. You can see where there's 3 dots. I do that often. That he lived before the Hebrew Exodus, Job did, before the destruction of God, Sodom and Gomorrah, and before Abraham is evidence from the character, style, contents, and non-contents of this book. And I remember hearing that in seminary, that Job was regarded as the oldest book and person in the Bible. From repeated astronomical allusions contained in this book, different mathematicians have calculated that Job lived and wrote somewhere about 2150 years before Christ. And yet already in the time of Job, the heavens were astronomically laid out and arranged. In other words, these constellations were all understood, laid out, and probably even written down. With the zodiac formed, the constellations named, the figures of them drawn and recorded, and the same accepted and celebrated by God's people as the particular adornment of the sky in which to read the Almighty's glory. Well, I don't know if all of the constellations were, but the book of Job mentions several. I want to put out this warning again. There's a difference between sinfully worshiping the stars, looking to them to guide you and for your future, and to find out who you are by your sign in the stars. That is, and I don't know the Hebrew word for crap, but I'm just going to say that's a bunch of crap, and you got to stay away from that. And Isaiah 47 said, keep practicing your spells and your evil magic. Let your astrologers, and actually, he's not telling us to do this. He's just saying, if you keep on doing this to the Israelite people, you're going to be in really big trouble. Let your astrologers, not scientists who look at the heavens, look at the stars, but astrologers who turn away from God to look up to the stars, like we said, and your stargazers who foretell the future month by month, come to you, rise up and save you. They're not going to be able to. They are like straw. Fire burns them. They can't rescue themselves from the flames. In other words, they're going to hell with that kind of turning away from God. This is not what we're talking about here. This is a warning to Babylon, the city of the nation that just had different gods and were evil. Here's another thing. We're getting a little bit closer, I think, to the end of this session, but the 7-day week, have you ever wondered if all over the world everyone goes 7 days? Where did it come from if they do? I'm not sure if everyone in every culture does, but this is what they said back then, okay? We find among all the ancient nations, at least the ancient ones, he gives a list of them, that the 7 days of the week were in universal use. Isn't it interesting? God, at creation, he created the earth in 6 days and said to rest on the seventh. That's a Sabbath day. That's a 7-day week. How did it get around the world? And what is far more remarkable, each of these nations named the days of the week, as we still do, after the 7 planets, numbering the sun and moon among them. So this is quite interesting. I didn't know this. I mean, I've heard some of it. But he says, hence we have Sunday, Moon Day, however you pronounce that, Tusko or Tuvis Day, which is the name for Mars. So Tuesday is named after Mars. Woden's Day or Wednesday, named after Mercury. These are planets. Thor's Day being named after Jupiter. Frigga Day being the same as Venus Day, you could say Friday is. And lastly, Saturn Day or Saturday, anciently the most sacred of the 7. It's fascinating stuff. He goes on to say there certainly were books or writings before the flood, for the New Testament quotes from one of them, which it ascribes to Enoch. And Adam still lived more than 300 years after Enoch was born. All the known primitive alphabets had the same number of letters. This again, I can't vouch for this. If it's true, this is amazing too. All the known primitive alphabets, at least that he had ever studied, and this guy was a scholar studying things, and others were too, had the same number of letters, including 7 vowels, and all began as now with A, B, C, and ended with STU. Well, like I say, I might put a guarantee on that, but I do know that there are alphabets that are signs, and that Enoch is quoted, his prophecies, in the New Testament. So the first one, Virgo, reminds us at the very least of this passage from Isaiah 7, verse 14, where Isaiah prophesies, he predicts in the future, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And we're told that this one named Emmanuel, that word means God with us. So a virgin, and we know the Virgin Mary gave birth to Jesus. And he was more than just a baby and more than a man when he grew up. He was God with us in human flesh. So that's where we're going to end for today. And we'll start a part 3 next time. So God bless all of you.